There's a lot of buzz around design thinking nowadays, and we see whenever we Google design thinking as a word, we come across this diagram which looks like a chemical formula. There are 5 words written: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test, in specific order, in some specific colors, and one wonders if there is more story around it. Also, if you Google further, there is more and more complicated formulae or diagram, I would say, not formulae, available, which say that design thinking is not as linear as it was thought to be, and there are more loops into it, more recursive it is, and there are arrows flying all across. Somehow, if you look at any professional situation which is already overloaded with more and more models like this, agile, lean thinking, then somewhere in IT industry, CMM had come in, and some structuring processes, more creative thinking, value engineering, multiple processes have been flying around. And design thinking now says that we will solve the problems more creatively, in a better structured, more humane way. What we've been doing at Turian Labs is looking at these problems slightly more non-linear method, I would say not as rigid a structure as it is thought to be, but in terms of just 4 points, 4 tenets as we call them, 4 tenets to remember while solving any problem or tackling any governance situation, or for that matter any everyday situation we come across and we want to tackle it in a collaborative, creative way. We call them design tenets, so design thinking tenets, and there are 4. It starts with empathy. Empathize with the context. That's of course the conventional model also says empathize. I think it's an important anchor point for design thinking, that go close to the context we are in, go close to the consumer in case you are into a consumer facing business, go close to the client in case you are a service business, and go close to the people in general in case you are into the governance. Empathy has been the cornerstone of this design way of thinking, primarily because ever since the industrialization came in, we were faced with a situation when the manufacturer is distant, quite distant, in fact thousands of miles apart from the consumer or the people who are actually using it. What this did is to separate the insights of usage from the creator to the user. And that's where, in the current age of internet, current age of media overload, and diversified consumers and users, we are faced with a situation where empathy had to be made the starting point of a creative process. So go close to the context and figure it out, rather than taking it or starting it your journey only from the data available. Data will only tell a part of the story. That's the tenet number 1. Number 2 tenet says something very interesting. It is abductive reasoning. Abductive reasoning is close to deductive and inductive, the words which we are probably familiar with. Now, deductive reasoning is a set of things which you start from a wider set and you zero down on one, you funnel it down to a logical reasoning. That's deductive reasoning. For example, if we say Manoj always sits on a chair and the room has no chair, you are deducing that Manoj will keep standing in that room. However, the other part is inductive reasoning, where you try to generalize. You saw Manoj sitting on a chair once or twice and you generalize that Manoj always sits on a chair. Now this is generalization. Your starting set is limited observations and you're generalizing it to a much wider set, infinite set in fact. That's inductive reasoning. Abductive reasoning goes a step further and takes a very pragmatic view of the situation, and which is, okay, we only watched Manoj sitting twice or thrice probably on a chair. This doesn't mean that he may not sit on the ground. Now, if you take a pragmatic situation, it creates a hypothesis that when the room is empty, there is as well a possibility that we will or he will sit on a chair or on the ground. So there are two hypotheses evolving. Now this simple example illustrates that abductive reasoning moves from a hypothesis to hypothesis. In the case where we are every day bombarded with tremendous amount of data and one doesn't know the complete situation at hand, complete reality is not within the grasp of the person who is looking at it, the best way to go forward is abductive reasoning, where you make an hypothesis based on what is available and go forward, prove the hypothesis right or wrong and take the next step. That's abductive reasoning, and that's a very important tenet of design thinking going forward. Number 3 is visual thinking. Now if you see, visual thinking is not something which is new as a word. When we were cavemen, we were doing this. We were writing on not in terms of letters, we were drawing pictures. This is as primitive as it can go. We probably lost it somewhere as a language evolved. So what happens is, when we are speaking, as I am speaking to you, the mind is analyzing, and this analysis happens from the left brain. But when you draw things, your right brain becomes active. And that's where the holistic discussion, a holistic view of the situation can come in, if we are thinking from left and right brain both together. In a corporate situation, in industry or professional situations, one will never be thinking alone. One will never be doing things alone. It will always be a team. How do you communicate your ideas without getting your egos on the way? How do you reflect on somebody else's idea with a requisite thought to it and actually springboard from it? That's where the visual thinking comes in. If you see design thinking parlance, people using a lot of sticky notes like what you see behind. Now this is a reflection that people are trying to put their thoughts, even if they're writing, it is on the paper, it is in front of everyone, and all the people can reflect on it and springboard and move one step ahead in terms of synthesizing a complete new whole. And that's where visual thinking is something of a important anchor stone or cornerstone for design thinking. Fourth tenet is called iterative prototyping, or just prototyping. And prototyping is something which is again a primitive art, primitive skill. We have been refining our tools when we were hunters, doing things and trying to see if it works and then trying to do it again. But prototyping has been now, in the given situation of current industry, has been taken to a completely different level. The idea is that because the process of making for masses is becoming more and more complicated, more and more involving process, in case you fail after an effort to make something new, and when you've launched a product, let's say something like a car, if you fail at the stage of making a mock-up and displaying it in one of the auto shows, probably you lost $1 million or maybe a few millions. Think of a situation where the car model has been manufactured and launched and it bombs in the market. Probably hundreds of millions of dollars are down the drain. Now this is in case if you fail towards the end, the cost of the damages are much more. So the new mnemonic which has come in is called fail fast, fail cheap. That means that earlier in the process you fail, the cost of failure is much lesser. This doesn't mean that everyone has to fail. The idea is to secure your ground as early as you can. And actually, one has to be afraid of failure. It doesn't say that it is promoting failure per se, which is the common notion going around, that it's okay to fail. No, it's not okay to fail. Nobody wants to fail really. But it's just to secure your ground. So prototype is something realizing your ideas much earlier in the process, giving them a physical shape. And that's where the fourth tenet, prototyping, plays an important role in actually curtailing the uncertainties in the process. So this is the way the 4 tenets provide an easier, simpler and straightforward method to remember design thinking and practice design thinking rather than a long formula which could be sometimes quite involving and looping and all that. It is something, using these 4 tenets, it can be applied in everyday situation, or in a professional situation, or be it in a public governance kind of ideation.